Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. In this edition of Best of the Week, bit of Deontay Wilder, and towards the end, good news for New Zealand boxing fans. Joseph Parker will be on free-to-air television for his upcoming fight. But also, a few comments there, does that speak to his falling value in New Zealand? The paid broadcasters not picking it up, not putting on pay-per-view. So we'll talk about that, and a few little bits of rantiness in that included as well. But first, starting with Deontay Wilder. So his trainer, Malik Scott, he says that Wilder's most likely to fight Andy Ruiz Jr. next, but there is a potential another opponent that could be in play. So he was talking to Best Sports Betting Canada. He said it's down to the mystery opponent and Andy Ruiz Jr. Since AJ had made up his mind and does not want to fight Deontay right now, we're down to Andy Ruiz and the mystery guy. The mystery fighter is not as guaranteed to happen as the Ruiz fight. If you're looking at it from the business perspective, it's most likely going to be the mandatory shot, Ruiz. It's looking like Ruiz, but in this game, there's no telling, as Deontay is big-time boxing. When you're big-time boxing, and as sad or as unfortunate it may sound to some people, mandatories don't mean nothing. Fighters have stepped aside to make big fights happen. This goes on in boxing. It's what the fans want, or what makes business sense for the fighters and their team. It's likely to be Ruiz, but if not, there are other negotiations going on as well. Malik Scott, Deontay Wilder's trainer. So a couple of comments there saying the mandatory doesn't necessarily mean anything. Well, where is Deontay Wilder's path to a title? Tyson Fury has fought him 3 times. Is he going to give him a voluntary? Probably not. Alexander Usyk, if he wins and beats Tyson Fury, there's probably a rematch anyway, but it's likely that the winner of Undisputed, should it occur, the belts will fragment. Is Deontay Wilder guaranteed a shot at any of those belts? Well, possibly, but it's boxing. Nothing is guaranteed. But in terms of the what next, the immediate what next, who could this mystery fighter be? And does that actually lead to a massive payday and pay-per-views and boxing fans being happy? Well, I'm struggling to think who it could be. I mean, Dillian Whyte seems like the most logical. He's free, but then again, potentially he's got a fight with Anthony Joshua down the line mid-year. That's something that's waiting for him, as has been stated by Eddie Hearn. And let's face it, DAZN want to make money. Whyte and Joshua will make them some money, and they need that. They haven't been doing fantastic with subscribers, and obviously some of their big names have either been losing or not fighting as frequently as they probably want. So the mystery person, I know some people have said, well, it could end up being Daniel Dubois, but he's injured. Get real, he's injured. It's not going to be him next. So you start to go, well, he's fought a number of guys. No one needs to see some of the guys that he's fought in terms of rematches. There's no one naturally on the PBC, apart from Andy Ruiz Jr., that makes any sense right now. He's not going to fight Frank Sanchez because Frank Sanchez can't fill up a phone box with fans. He just can't. So in that sense, well, what's it going to be? Ruiz is already on his side of the street anyway. It's easy to make. It's kind of like you sort of start to build the narrative, both losing champions, and the winner of that fight gets a shot at the WBC title at some point down the line. And obviously it's probably the biggest fight in terms of the stable at PBC that they can make right now. So it has to be an external fighter. But if Usyk's tied up, you've got Joshua seemingly tied up elsewhere. Tyson Fury's tied up and already fought Wilder 3 times. Who? I mean, apart from those sorts of names, would it be Joe Joyce? I mean, that might make some sense. And obviously with Wilder being a big puncher and Joyce having a good chin and being very hittable, maybe that would be something that Frank Warren and PBC would be willing to make. Apart from that, the options start to get a bit thin and limited. I mean, who's got really a buzz right now that is going to generate a real lot of interest for a fight? Apart from Joyce and Whyte, I'm not so sure that there's many options available that make any sense or make any money that are better than Andy Ruiz Jr. And I think Wilder wants to have in his pocket should he beat Andy Ruiz Jr., the option of that heavyweight title fight. Then again, if he fought Joyce, he could end up having the WBO interim title, which would make him the mandatory for the WBO title when that shot becomes available. Anyway, it's interesting, but I think it is going to be Ruiz next. Is this just some smoke and mirrors from Malik Scott? He's not even actually Deontay Wilder's manager. Are we forgetting that? It's actually Shelley Finkel and also the co-manager, JD's. So does Scott really have, the right to be commenting on Wilder's behalf in terms of the sort of other opponents and other bits and pieces? I don't know. It's a question. I'm just asking. And moving on to a somewhat related topic with Scott. So he thinks that Gerald Washington is in line to face Anthony Joshua next. He says Gerald Washington is one of the leading names to possibly fight Anthony Joshua. It's not a rumor, it's an actual fact that he's one of the options, and it's something Gerald is ready for. I keep telling people Gerald is a big, strong, heavy-handed guy. The physicalities are there, but what we've been working on is his mental stamina, and fighting at the highest level, that's more important than the physical. And it has been a case that Gerald Washington has seemingly wilted in fights over his career. Most notably, the Jarrell Miller fight 4 or 5 years ago was a good example of it, and it's happened again since then. I just kind of think that Gerald Washington, even though he's in the conversation, is it really realistic? Remember, there was that narrative forming for a while that Joshua only fought guys that were close to 40 or 40 and over, of which Washington is, and that he was just sort of fighting old men. And wouldn't this play into that narrative? I would have thought you'd not really want to play into that narrative. Joshua's fought much younger and more guys in their prime in recent years. So does he want to be going to a 40-something Gerald Washington, who actually is powerful? He's got a big right hand. He does seemingly wilt in fights, and it does seem to be a mental thing. But he's got power. He absolutely turned the lights out of Robert Helenius. And there have been guys that have said Gerald Washington is one of the biggest punchers in the division, but he just doesn't seem to trust himself and have the confidence in his abilities. But at this point, I think I would have thought his shot was gone. I'm surprised they're sort of investigating that fight at all. Do they really want to be facing a big puncher, and the fact that he's also over 40 years old? It's a question. Demsey McKean, who was in the Matchroom stable, believes that he can topple Anthony Joshua if he gets that fight. His name had seemingly bubbled out of nowhere in the past week or 10 days. And as I said in another video, I believe that they're floating his name to sort of gauge the interest and perhaps use it as a negotiating tactic with other names that are potentially in the mix. Remember, we've just heard Gerald Washington. Chris Arreola might be another name. He's been sort of floated by Eddie Hearn previously. Jermaine Franklin could be an outside choice, and also Otto Varlin, who had been the name on many people's lips for some time. But in terms of McKean, so he's quoted as saying, "We're one of the front runners for a possible opponent for Anthony Joshua. I could be the man to retire Joshua, and I'm very confident I can do that. But don't get me wrong, there are still more fights for AJ. If he loses to me, a top 10 heavyweight as well, that shouldn't be the end." I'm sorry, I got to jump in there. Demsey McKean's not a top 10 heavyweight. He's maybe about a top 30 heavyweight. Definitely not top 10 in the world. Maybe in a sanctioning body, but let's sort of separate the two. Being a top 10 or top 15 in a sanctioning body doesn't mean in the world. It just means that sanctioning body. So he's not a top 10 and does not have wins to justify himself being, even calling himself a top 10 heavyweight. Wins over Johnny Rice and Kikito Latelli do not make you a top 10 fighter. I'm sorry, Demsey, it doesn't. So he continues, though, people probably don't give him the credit he deserves. What he has done for the heavyweight game, he's brought a lot of eyes and money to the heavyweight division. And of course, McKean wants a piece of that pie. He's probably the biggest name in boxing. Everyone is after him, including me. It's the name to have on your resume. There are still fights to be made, and people are going to pay to watch those fights. But 3 losses in a row, does he need to keep doing this? He is well set up now. He probably still has his doubts. He still doubts himself a lot. I know that. But who wouldn't know that when they're at the top in the limelight and cop a lot of criticism? There are a lot of factors, but I have skills to do that. Retire him in brackets for sure. Okay, so McKean sounding very confident, talking a big game there. But I do think that if he faces Anthony Joshua, out of most of the names that we've just named before, he's one of the, I don't want to say a soft touch, but he's certainly not as tough a fight as some of the others. And I think ultimately he gets knocked out by Anthony Joshua. Clearly talking a big game. And let's face it as well, I just want to make this comment. His profile in the past few days, to a week, has got the biggest boost in his whole career just with his name being connected to Anthony Joshua's. And whether it was a tactic by Matchroom to try persuade other fighters who were in play for the Joshua fight to pull their head in and wind their negotiation demands back, well, it's irrelevant. In terms of McKean, he's got a major boost. And let's face it, if he doesn't get the fight, people know his name a lot more now than they did a week ago. And he probably ends up on the Joshua undercard as well, with a much bigger profile than he did just a few weeks ago. But I do think if he faces Joshua, he probably gets knocked out. And moving on to Joseph Parker, an announcement by his management company, Duco Events. So Duco Events is run by David Higgins. Higgins used to promote him, and now Higgins is his manager / advisor. So there has been an announcement that Joseph Parker's next fight is going to be on free-to-air television in New Zealand. This will be, as the headline says, Parker to fight live on New Zealand free-to-air TV for the first time as Warner Brothers / Discovery ANZ enters the boxing ring. So this is a big announcement, because if you've been a Joseph Parker fan, you've had to put and living in New Zealand and sometimes pay-per-views in Australia, but especially in New Zealand, you've had to put your hand in your pocket relentlessly through his career. And he would be facing all manner of journeymen on pay-per-view. And there would be the excuses from David Higgins and co. to say that we were funding Joseph Parker's journey. And thankfully, it looks like it's been funded enough, at least for now. So it's actually giving back to the boxing fan. The long-suffering, paying Joseph Parker pay-per-view fan is going to get this one for free. So it's going to be on Channel 3. They just call it 3. And we'll go to some of the comments. We'll just skip past the Discovery people. Thank you to them, but don't really care about that. So Higgins says, because he has achieved so much, it's easy to forget that Joseph Parker is still 31. But for a heavyweight, that means his best years are still ahead of him. This is an important fight for Joseph against a tough opponent as he looks to get the ball rolling for a huge year in 2023. And Higgins says, the move to free-to-air TV was a great chance for Kiwi sports fans to see the nation's most successful boxer while he was still well and truly in his prime. Well, let's face it, that's not the motivation. Honestly, it's not. They couldn't get it to one of the pay-per-view channels, the subscription channels. Joseph Parker, the bulk of his fights have been on Sky Sports New Zealand. And with some of the recent opponents in recent years and maybe a bit of flagging interest in Parker, he also just lost to Joe Joyce, and that would have probably dented Sky's confidence in picking up the fight. Remember, they're putting on pay-per-view and trying to make some money, and they would have had to pay an upfront fee, all that sort of stuff. So they've obviously either been outbid or their bid was sufficiently lower this time that they were like, well, we're not going all in on the Joseph Parker business this time. It could be a sign, actually, even though it's been spun as a positive thing on free-to-air TV for the first time, that the pay broadcasters are not as necessarily interested in spending big money to get the Parker fights anymore. So he had one fight, I believe it was on Spark Sport, but Spark Sport's going broken out of business, and they're selling off all their rights or giving them away to the national broadcaster in New Zealand from mid-2023. So it's good news for fans. I mean, whatever the situation is, if recent form, that sort of stuff has caused a bit of a crisis of confidence from Sky Sports New Zealand, that's great for the fan because it's ending on public TV, which is, it's free. All you need to do is have a connection. But in terms of the fight, and I know some of these comments are probably going to get some people riled, but you know what? Just, cry into your tissues and, whatever. So Parker says, good on Jack for stepping up to take this fight. He's a tough guy who is very skilled and clearly backs himself. But unfortunately for him, he's made a huge mistake. I've got a point to prove and he is standing in my way. Let's face it, the reality is this is a return fight after getting knocked out by Joe Joyce. Actually, going back up to here, it says in here, it's not attributed to anyone, he suffered a defeat in his last outing. Parker's stock in the UK has not been dented after he pushed the hulking Joyce all the way in a Blood and Thunder 11th-round thriller. That seemingly is gilding the lily somewhat, because I remember Joseph Parker throwing a lot of big shots early on, and after a few rounds at a career high weight, which was obviously a disaster for him, he was gassing badly. And Joe Joyce started to absolutely piece him up and break him down, ultimately knocked him out. I think his stock is down. It might have been an entertaining performance, and sure, you've got some window lickers saying some of those punches he landed would have knocked others out, but others wouldn't have allowed him to land some of those punches. Joyce is so open it's not funny, but he can take those punches. He walked through Parker's punches and knocked him out. His stock is down. He's gone back to Sky, and now he's having a tune-up against a cruiserweight in Jack Massey. Of course his stock is down. If it wasn't, he wouldn't be having a confidence builder against a cruiserweight who's coming up to heavyweight. So in terms of Jack Massey, he's saying, I do not turn down any challenges to have a fight like this in Manchester. It's a dream come true. A lot of cruiserweights are shying away from fighting me. We've got an offer. You've got to take these things with both hands. It's what I do. I'm a boxer. I've been boxing since the age of 11. I never shy away from a fight, ever. I'm not turning up for a payday. I'm turning up to make a massive, massive upset. Don't sleep on me. People haven't seen the best of me. Well, I guess we'll see. I mean, it's sort of talking a big game, but can he deliver? I guess for the first time in a long time, Parker won't have the speed advantage. And especially if he comes in and he's still bloated and not in the sort of condition that he needs to be. How they ever thought that coming in at 255 was going to work for a guy with gas tank issues? Anyone's guess. Madness. And if he comes in at 250 to 255 and ends up basically gassing after a few rounds, well, maybe Massey will be in the fight. But hopefully they've learnt their lesson, but I guess we will see. Maybe Parker will think that he can knock this guy out. But Parker, not the biggest puncher, it's not a guarantee to knock guys out. But then again, Massey is not on the same level, or has not proven to be so far, so potentially he can. But, there's some intrigue, but let's face it, it's a confidence builder, and it's seemingly Sky Sports New Zealand and Spark Sport did not want to put the big money in to get it, to put it on pay-per-view, because generally all Parker's fights are on pay-per-view, as I mentioned. And the fact this is the first time he's on free TV in New Zealand, it kind of says something. It says that despite the press release saying that his reputation is not dented and all that sort of stuff, maybe it is just a little. And actually, he's a card filler to some extent on this one. What is he, third or fourth on the bill? Yeah, make of that what you will. But I'm still glad I don't have to put my hand in the pocket. I'm going to watch a very good card with some very good fights. Fraser Clark also on there. Matty Harris also on there. There's a lot to like about it, especially when you don't have to pay for it and you don't have to stream it either. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.